Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome to the Big Questions from the Manor Church of England School in York. I'm Nicky Campbell. Eric Pickles, the Community Secretary, has come up with a plan to bring us all closer together across class, colour and creed with shared British values. Our first big question: should we promote a united British identity? Poet Benjamin Zephaniah says Britain's strength is that it's a blend of different cultures and creeds who share only one value: belief in democracy. On Friday, Iran voted for a new parliament. President Ahmadinejad's candidates are regarded as moderates compared to those supporting Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei. With tensions already heightened with Israel and the West over Iran's nuclear potential, the result could affect us all. Our next big question: is Iran a real threat? This Iranian exile says Iran has already fostered terrorism around the world. Access to nuclear weapons could be a huge threat to us all. And our final big question this morning: should we listen to the angels? The author Lorna Byrne sees angels wherever she goes and believes they're using her to send a message to the world. Welcome all of you to the Big Questions this morning. Morning all. Now, separate lives, differing values, being tolerated across Britain's diverse faith, ethnic and social mix is soon to be a thing of the past. The government is going to do its best to promote freedom of speech, freedom of worship, democracy and the rule of law as fundamental British values to be accepted by all. Should we promote a united British identity? And Douglas Murray, how can you construct a narrative that, unites under one umbrella, if you like, on a rainy day? A hedge fund manager in Weybridge with a young Muslim lad growing up in Bradford.
It would be very hard to create it if you were trying to do so from scratch. Fortunately, we're not doing it from scratch. I think you can create a shared British identity through our shared values, through our shared culture, through our history, our past, and that if you teach that and you transmit it well, it's something which anyone can feel a part of.
What aspect of that history do you emphasise?
All sorts of things. You emphasise, apart from anything else, the good and the bad. There's a feeling that at some points in our past we might only have celebrated the good things in our culture. Some people would argue in recent years we've only celebrated the bad. You've got to teach people pride and also awareness of pitfalls.
What's the pride then? In invention, industry, culture?
In all sorts of things. People feel pride in different. Some people feel pride in our sporting achievements. Some people feel pride in our cultural achievements. I think most people feel a bit of all of these things. I think the key thing, though, is that when people talk about a shared British identity, they tend to assume that you're excluding people somehow. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the key thing is you have a core culture. A culture on which all sorts of variations are played, all sorts of different people pursue different things around it, but that they know what the core is that they're riffing around.
What is the core?
Is that Benjamin?
The core.
The core in this case is Britain, is British identity, is the British history, British culture, British achievements, writing, philosophy, art, architecture.
But that's multiculturalism. You just said a lot of things there.
Yes, but and they're all
multiculturalism. I mean, Britain, by definition, is multicultural. The Celts, the Picts, the Scyllas, all the early tribes that came here came with a different culture. Even the Romans brought a culture. So the new cultures that come here now are doing what we should be doing here, is embracing them. And I would say not even tolerating them, but embracing them, because that is what is at the core of being British.
Yes.
Not sitting down. If Pickles said, Mr. Eric Pickles said, he wants to come up with an idea of what Britishness is. Could you imagine a group of men, probably in suits, sitting around a table trying to define what it is as British?
You shouldn't, as I say, it shouldn't be invented. You're not having to invent something. It's something that exists. You just have to identify.
Well, yeah. What about empire?
Empire would be part of it. You would teach the good things about empire, and you teach the bad things about empire.
I think no one really believes in that kind of concept of Britishness. And what is disturbing is that the Prime Minister, David Cameron, in his Munich speech, Eric Pickles, all ahead of that election on May the 3rd, are trying to turn up the noise on this debate in a deliberate attempt to attract audiences that, who knows, what their views are.
Harris Rafiq, I know you dispute that, so let me ask, why do we need this? Let's go back to that particular base.
Okay. There are a number of reasons why we need it. I think the problems that we have, if we have people, multiculturalism and embracing multiculturalism is great, it's fantastic. That's what we should be doing. But we shouldn't promote faith-based identity politics, or we shouldn't promote people being treated differently because of their faith, because of their race, because of their culture. And that's the thing that's been happening over the last 10 or 15 years, and I've been involved in that and seen the brunt of that. And I think that David Cameron and Eric Pickles are trying to undo what's been done over the last 10 years, where people have been dealt with according to their faith, colour, etc., and they've been living separate lives, not mixing, not integrating. And I'm not talking about assimilation, I'm talking about integration, not getting on with each other, people not even being able to speak English yet being born here.
And what about the way they dress? I know you've got a thing about the way some people dress who come from Pakistan, for example. Explain that.
Yeah, when immigrants came to this country, well, it's natural when they come to this country, they bring with them a particular culture. And then they actually keep hold of the culture. I remember my uncles have been here since the 20s, my father came here over in the 50s, and I remember looking at photos of the immigrants that came over. They were dressing in a manner that was really helping them mix and integrate into society. What's happened now is that the people who are maybe Pakistani or Bangladeshi are more Pakistani than people in Pakistan.
They have one identity, one culture. What does that even mean?
A few years ago, British culture, a British man would have been represented by a man in a bowler hat. Right? You don't see that now. It changes. I know somebody who, years and years ago, got married when she was 18. Her husband died when she was 20. And she stayed in mourning, covered in black, for all her life. And she lived to be 80 or something. She was in black in mourning. That would have been seen as British cultural dress at the time. It's not anymore.
Kieran, should Kieran be wearing a tweed two-piece then instead of what she's wearing just now?
No, she absolutely has the right to wear what she wants. I was a punk rocker when I was 15, so that's fine. You know, I dress
We
differently.
celebrate the diversity that we have in this country, but what is missing is the glue that binds us together as a whole community.
So how do we get that glue?
How we'll get that with a sense of belonging is through British values of freedom of speech, rule of law, democracy, all those things which are quite prevalent amongst all the religions as well.
And a common language.
And that will bring us together, and English, being the common language, will serve to bridge them gaps that we have with communities who are alienated and isolated.
We have another language. Forget about the Urdu and the Hindi and the Mandarin.
There has to be one common language.
What about Welsh?
English.
Gaelic?
We have lots of languages, but there has to be one common one,
Brummie?
especially for those communities who are coming into the country to help us engage with them.
Reverend Canon Sam, Reverend Canon Sam, back with you, Benjamin. Let's bring Simon. Do you not see the need? Eric Pickles said the separate lives strategy has failed.
I think people live separate lives because it's natural. I mean, I don't think there's a sort of policy of separateness. I think people gravitate to people who are like them, and they live in their own comfort zone, and that's the reality we face. I mean, it's where we come together. It's this Englishness that I'm concerned about, because I work in Bradford, and I work with community groups, new immigrant groups, so asylum seeker, refugees and others, and I'm appalled at the fact that there are no help for people to access services. People are isolated because they can't access services, because they can't speak English, and they're living in these sort of enclaves, and I'm trying to help them bring out, and individuals like me are doing it, but it's all voluntary work, and the councils aren't doing enough, and there's no proper government policy of helping people accept or understand what makes up Britain. We can talk about democracy and those sorts of things.
Let me tell you a real practical problem. I know a young chap who was born in this country. He went to a school which was predominantly Pakistani origin, heritage people, 99%. He went to university only mixed with Pakistanis, people from Pakistan. He worked for his father, Pakistani-based customers. He had a problem with his father, left the company. I got him a job somewhere else, working in mainstream society. He just couldn't survive in that culture, in that job, and he had to leave. He signs on now. You know, this is somebody who's born here.
So it's limiting life prospects, limiting job prospects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think somebody wearing a niqab, for example, should be reading the 9 o'clock news on television?
Well, if she wants to, but I certainly would have a problem taking my family to a restaurant if the waiters were wearing a balaclava.
Jamil, do you want to come in? That's you.
I think we get hung up on some trivialities, you know, in terms of actually how we dress. Yeah. I mean, how do you define what dress is? I think that what this gentleman said is actually it's going to be a strategy, government policy, not just scaremongering, not just sensationalising things or using it for their political ends. If there's a genuine concern, then we would see that strategy coming out. And I think working in equality and diversity for the last 7 years...
Do you think these things are happening naturally? Because you were saying, when we were having a cup of tea earlier, you were saying when you go to Kashmir, for example, you feel British.
Well, at the end of the day, you pick up the norms, the conventions, the kind of culture of doing things, and you only realise that when you go out. I mean, you mentioned Bromley, and you know, the colleague who works with me, we talk about Lancashire and Yorkshire. Yeah. You know, there's obviously over cricket or football, whatever it is, but the fact that there are going to be slight differences. And when you were saying earlier on, I hope you don't mind me saying that when you see people jumping queues, you get incredibly... Yeah, but because that's a very British thing, isn't it? In some societies. I found out this hard way, you know, when actually going back to visit my grandfather, who's lived in this country for 50 years, just wanted a warm place to retire. You know, we don't have any of those in Yorkshire. But when I went to see him, right at the airport, I started seeing these things, and there was an elderly gentleman behind me, a Pakistani with a white beard, who started kicking off. People over there accept this. It's just normal, you know, that people just jump the queue, and it's who you know. It might happen in small cases in this country, but it's not common. You will not accept it. It doesn't matter who it is. So people talk about this. People, Asian people, Pakistani people, when they go to Pakistan, they tell people that this. They say, look, we love it in Britain. We don't get this. When we come here, we have to go to influential people to get things done. In Britain, we don't need anybody to get things done. Yeah, yeah, okay. But so Benjamin Zephaniah, what should we do to, what's a better idea to foster a sense of unity then? What about the Queen?
What about her?
Well, does she not transcend all this? Is she not a great unifying force?
I feel very British. If I go to Jamaica, they look at me by the way I walk and the way I talk. I don't even have to talk, actually. They just see me in my body language, and they know that I'm British. But I would like to do away with the Queen. Does that make me less British?
Yes, definitely.
No, it does not. Of course it does not. There's been a tradition of republicanism in this country for years.
This is a monarchy, and a constitutional monarchy, and people have died getting that.
Does that make him less British?
Yes, it does.
It makes me less British.
It's absolutely outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous that on national television he should come on and want to say he gets rid of the Queen. It's our Queen. In this country you're talking about sunshine. Not anywhere else.
Sunshine.
Sorry.
How dare you?
Well, anywhere else...
How can you have people like this on your programme calling me sunshine?
Anywhere else, if you were to insult the head of state, you'd be in trouble. Well, you can't go to Iran and insult the
anywhere else. We are here.
Yeah, well, don't insult our head of state.
Isn't that the beauty of this country? You're allowed not to like the Queen. Well, what about the Levellers? What about the Chartists? What about... You're allowed to have Union Jack T-shirts and go to, you know...
And the threat about being
Diana,
British...
I'll be with you in a minute. Diana, go
The
on.
threat about being British and others is exactly the same the discussion that's coming up. And this is a problem that may create it in the future. I think people in this country should not be defined by their race, by their gender, by their culture. It will be this diverse British community. And I think religion or language is a problem. If we want to talk, all have a common language called English, so then why government really cut English courses, English classes for those people who enter the UK? So there will be some support for people to learn language. Is all classes now people, they have to pay for that. So we need to do something.
And also, Benjamin, I mean, our friend there has highlighted something interesting.
He called me sunshine.
I know, you didn't like that, and I'm sure that, you know, I apologise if you were offended by that. But freedom of speech is absolutely vital, isn't it?
He just didn't give me any.
Well, you have it now. You have it now.
Quite seriously,
you have a freedom to think what you want about whatever you want.
Even when the Queen and the monarchy were German, right? Even back then, there was multiculturalism in this country. Not so long ago, the East End of London was a poor Jewish area.
Yeah.
There's other parts of the East End of London which was a poor German area. Poor Polish areas in Manchester and Birmingham. And when people came from those countries, they gathered together for security because they had people that understood them. Once they lifted themselves out of poverty, they moved out. And that's what needs to be addressed in these communities, in these very poor communities.
Yeah, poverty. Douglas Murray, this is actually about class, isn't it? This is about socio-economics.
To a great extent, yes. People who come into a country tend to be on the lower socio-economic class when they begin, and gradually over decades and then indeed centuries they come up. So yes, to an extent that's the case, and yes, to an extent it's true that there has always been immigration in this country. In the last 60 years it has been far, far larger than at any previous point in our history, and so some of these debates are now a lot more febrile than perhaps they were
Can't be more
then.
than any time in
I'm afraid there was. I mean, the amount of Huguenots who came to this country over the course of a century was the same number of people that were immigrating into Britain in a few months under New Labour. So it was a different, but it was just a different pace, and it's not necessary to pretend that away. It's also not necessary to pretend away the fact that although we have immigration, there has also always been a sense of identity in this country, which should not be ignored, and it should not be pretended away. And a lot of people now say, well, Britain has always been a country of immigrants, therefore we have no identity that's British, or no identity here. We do, people feel it, and a lot of damage is done when you tell people not only do you not have an identity, you don't have the right to an identity.
Let's go to your... go on, very quickly.
I was born in this country, educated in this country, and my identity is precisely not having that identity. I think the sense of Britishness is not having that identity.
That might be fine for you, but a lot of other people it might not be. A lot of other people want to feel an identity, want to feel a sense of pride in an identity. They might not want to, like you, celebrate not having an identity, but celebrate having one.
I think that is what Britishness is.
What is wrong with encouraging that pride of being British? And that was also help us to challenge extremism and all those people who are indulging in anti-national activities.
It's very dangerous.
We need to work together
what's
to
dangerous?
combat that.
It's very un-British to think like that. That's my view.
It's very un-British to have an idea of being British.
Exactly. And when you're abroad,
that's an interesting paradox,
recognizing what that gentleman said, when you're abroad, you do have that feeling of Britishness because you somehow know what it is. But it's very nuanced, very complicated. But the idea of British people wandering around saying, I'm proud of being British, isn't very British.
A lot of people do feel that, and I don't think you should pretend that they don't have that identity or shouldn't feel it. But if I just quickly on this, another thing that is worth considering is the fact that, you know, historically and around the world, what we have here is pretty unique. It's not completely unique, but very few other countries have this level of tolerance, decency, acceptance, and so on. And that isn't accidental. It is because there have been people in this country who have thought this through before. There is a tradition of philosophy in this country, even a religious tradition in this country, which has been accepting of people, and which we should know about if we're going to celebrate it.
But I think that if you get somebody to come up with an idea of what it is to be British, you will lose that multi-layered...
You're not coming up with it.
That will evolve. There's a difference between evolving a British identity evolving over time and celebrating multiculturalism and actively promoting that people live separately. There's a massive difference between the two.
Every time I ask somebody to tell me what is Britishness and to just put it in a sentence, they can never do it. Because the things that make me proud of being British are different, probably, to the things that make you proud of being British. I am proud of the working class struggle here.
There will be some commonalities, yeah, there will be some things in common.
Yeah.
And those
freedom of speech.
Yeah, freedom of speech, rule of law, democratic process, tolerance, acceptance, etc. These are the similarities. That's what we should focus on.
Sorry?
What freedom of speech? You ban television stations.
Let's talk about that in a minute.
The freedom of speech, which means Benjamin Zephaniah, who happens not to be a monarchist, can upset this gentleman who happens to be, and that's fine, because that's, in this country, the gentleman there is right on one thing, it is quite rare around the world to be able to be in a country and to say you don't want the head of state for it to be fine. But in this country, it is fine. That is part of the tradition. There is a long tradition of anti-monarchist activity in this country. That is part of it. It's not accidental.
But this is not a value of only being British. I think I am living in this country. I obey the law of this country. My identity is with human rights. Before being British, before being Asian, before being black, we are all human. And if I come from other country and come into the UK, just say I'm British, it will give actually lots of opportunity to the racists in this country to grow up. And this is again another threat. I think it's very damaging to divide people before being British or non-British. Yes. We are human beings. We should have a law, every single people to be entitled equally before the law.
Benjamin, last word.
There has been so much discrimination, especially against
Benjamin
women.
Zephaniah, last word on this one.
You just said you obey the law. In this country, women have the right to vote. How did they get the right to vote? By disobeying the law.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed. Give Benjamin and Douglas and everybody a round of applause for that.